Chapter 45. The Year of Release. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 1 to 6. At the end of every 7 years thou shalt make a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbour shall release it. He shall not exact of it his neighbour, or of his brother, because it is called of the Lord's release. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother thine hand shall release. Save when there shall be no poor among you, for the Lord shall greatly bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it. Only if thou carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all these commandments which I command thee this day. For the Lord thy God blesseth thee, as he promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow, and thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 1 to 6. The laws concerning diet and debt are repeated so often that one would think that there would be no misunderstanding about their meaning. Both sets of laws are commonly neglected, however. Debt on a long-term basis can lead to poverty, and a poor diet can mean ill health. But many seem more ready to risk bad health and poverty than to obey God. Our text is concerned with another aspect of the Sabbath: 1 day of rest in 7, 1 year in 7 for both men and the land, and the cancellation of debts in the 7th year.
David F. Payne, while not in agreement with this law, still wrote,
Here we see at its clearest that Deuteronomy's, quote, laws, end quote, are not just fixed decrees, but a, quote, designed for life, end quote. The climax of the passage is not the law about the cancellation of debts, but the appeal to the hearts in verse 11. The opposite of law is crime. The opposite of God's moral laws is sin. God's laws are indeed His design for life, and we neglect them to our loss. Peace with God means that we are mindful of our neighbour's needs. This does not mean status welfarism, but godly help. The biblical premise is that the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. Psalm 24, verse 1. Man is therefore under God's law and totally dependent on His grace and bounty. Life cannot be on man's terms, but only on God's terms. This means obedience to His laws and a care for the earth and men. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 22 to 29 requires a second tithe for the care of the needy. Another aspect of that care is the cancellation of debts. The permitted debts were short-term ones, for the time remaining until the next Sabbath year. There were thus debts from 1 to 6 years only, or for a matter of days, weeks, or months only. The 7th year was a year of release. It began at the beginning of the 7th year, as verse 12 makes clear. If men obeyed these laws, verse 4 tells us literally, there should be no poor among you. Poverty results from the violation of God's laws. Verse 2 calls the release the Lord's release, or as H. Wheeler Robinson rendered it, a release in honour of Yahweh. An important aspect of this text is that it is emphatically stated that obedience is the key to prosperity. According to verse 6, the results of obedience will be threefold. First, it will result in God's blessing, His protecting and prospering care. Second, in the economic sphere, it will make God's people lenders to many nations, and not borrowers. This has no reference to modern foreign aid, but to business loans. Third, thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. Thus, the faithful nation will be blessed spiritually, economically, and politically. Without debt-free living, there can be no true rest. Because some in society will contract debt, the limitation to short-term indebtedness plus a Sabbath year means that all men will, in 1 year and 7, experience true rest. No debt, nor any other related problem can in that year threaten any covenant member. True rest is not only the absence of labour, but the absence of pressures. In a godless society, men seem determined to create pressures and burdens where there are none. An important aspect of the year of release is that it means a year of renewed opportunity. God does not allow men, if they obey His law, to destroy their future indefinitely. In Joseph Parker's words, "We must have the element of hopefulness in life. Without hope, we die. Tomorrow will be a day of ransom and liberty, if not tomorrow by the clock, yet tomorrow in feeling. Already the dawn is upon our hearts. Already we hear noises of a distant approach. Presently a great gladness will descend upon the soul. The child will be better in a day or two. When the weather warms, the doctor assures us, the life will be stronger. When arrangements now in progress are consummated, and they will be consummated presently, the whole house will be lighted up with real joy and thankfulness. So the spirit speaks to itself, so the heart sings songs in the night time, so we live by hope and faith. We find in this year of release what we all need, namely the principle of new chances, new opportunities, fresh beginnings. Tomorrow, said the debtor or the slave, is the day of release, and the next day I shall begin again. I shall have another chance in life. The burden will be taken away, the darkness will be dispersed, and life shall be young again. Every man ought to have more chance than one, even in our own life. God has filled the sphere of life with opportunities. The expired week is dead and gone, and Christ's own resurrection day comes with the gospel of hope and the gospel of a new beginning, the gospel of a larger opportunity, and the year dies with proclamations from heaven, and life says, when it is not utterly lost, I will begin again. I will no longer blot the book of life. I will write with a steady and careful hand. Parker rightly stressed that the meaning of God's law here is to give His covenant people fresh opportunities. Verse 3 makes it clear that this law does not apply to foreigners, that is, people outside the covenant. Having no faith, they are by nature slaves. When a covenant people drifts away from the faith, the consequences will be debt living and a contempt for God's law. The debt slavery they then incur will be the logical consequence of their loss of faith. As Isaiah said, "But the wicked are like the troubled sea, when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked." Isaiah chapter 57, verses 20 and 21. It is interesting to note that, while all sources dealing with ancient Hebraic life tell us that the 7th year was a year of release, as the text says, and the debts were permanently cancelled, some modern commentators state arbitrarily that it could not have been so. They insist that debts were merely subjected to a postponement of payment for a year. They have no evidence whatsoever for their opinion, which goes against the plain statement of the text. If such scholars were logical, they would have to say that verses 12 to 18 dealing with the emancipation of bondservants likewise refers to a year's release only. J. A. Thompson has pointed out that ancient Babylon also had a year of release whose purpose was to establish justice. This law, however, is very different in that no class distinction is made by God's law. The Code of Hammurabi made distinctions between members of the aristocracy, priests, landowners, rulers, military leaders, and the underprivileged slaves. God's law sees all men as covenant members of a household of faith. God is concerned with the least as well as the greatest, and His law protects all of them. The Code of Hammurabi gave an advantage to the rich and powerful, whereas God's law erases the distinction to protect all. G. T. Manley and others have rightly called this law the Lord's release. It is not a humanitarian act, but a religious one. Its motivation is not pity nor sympathy, but a godly faith. We too often forget what St. Paul said about the nature and purpose of work. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, we are told, "Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labour, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth." This goes completely contrary to the modern temper. The idea that a key purpose of work is to be able to give to the needy, and that this is God's holy purpose, is remote to us, but it is God's requirement. It is a key aspect of the Sabbath doctrine. We rest in the Lord, and we enable our fellow covenant members to rest also. God's law protects all members of society. In the US, between 1960 and 1980, bankers had loan officers peddling loans from farm to farm, persuading debt-free farmers to buy more land or very costly equipment and to go deeply into debt. Many family farms, owned by the same family from 3 to 6 or more generations, were lost, and some banks went under. God's laws concerning debt protect both the borrower and the lender by forbidding disastrous and immoral policies.